Somewhere in your system prompt there is probably a line that says, "Verify your work before responding." Anthropic's own guide for Claude Opus 5 now tells you to remove it. Their exact words: "Instructions like these cause over-verification on Claude Opus 5, and removing them reduces wasted tokens with no loss in quality." That line used to help. The model changed. The line did not. This is a video about prompt lines that have an expiry date. Anthropic ships model-specific prompting guides, and between two Opus releases some of its recommendations change direction. Not a rewrite of the model, a change in the advice. So the skill now is not what to add, it is knowing which lines to take out. Second case, sharper. You point a code review harness at your repository, and your prompt says, "Be conservative, only report high-severity issues." The newer model reports fewer bugs than the old one did. It reads like a regression. Anthropic's guide calls that a likely harness effect, not a capability regression. The model may investigate just as thoroughly, then not report findings below the bar you set. I rewrote my own delegation rules 3 times in 4 weeks. Twice I was wrong in the same direction. I added instructions. A model behaved in a way I did not expect, so I wrote a rule to correct it. What actually fixed it, both times, was deleting a line I had written for an older model. Adding is the reflex. It is usually the wrong one. Here is the shape of the next 12 minutes. First, what actually changed between 2 model releases, taken straight from Anthropic's own documents. Then 5 rules, each one stamped on screen as volatile or durable. Volatile means true for this generation. Durable means true regardless of model. And finally, one test you can run on any line in your prompt to tell those two apart. So why would good advice go bad? Because most prompt instructions are not descriptions of your task. They are compensations. The model tends to do something you do not want, so you add a line to push back. That line is not documenting your job. It is patching a weakness. And patches have a lifetime, tied to the thing they were patching. The life cycle looks like this. The model has a weakness. You write a rule to compensate. The next release fixes the weakness. Your rule stays, because prompts tend to grow and rarely get pruned. And now the rule is not neutral. It is actively pushing the model away from behavior that is already correct. That is the whole failure mode, and it is quiet. This part is documented, not guessed. Anthropic publishes model-specific prompting guides, and each one is precise. This is what changed in this model's behavior. Here is what to do about it. These 2 pages are one Opus release apart. Put them side by side, and the advice does not merely get updated. In 3 places it changes direction, and in one of those, an API default flipped underneath it. Change 1. Subagents. The Opus 4.8 guide says the model tends to spawn fewer subagents by default, and tells you to give it explicit guidance around when subagents are desirable. The Opus 5 guide says it delegates to subagents more readily than prior models, and tells you to give explicit guidance on which scenarios warrant delegation, or set deterministic caps on how many agents can be launched. Same lever, opposite direction. Change 2. Thinking. This one is an API default that flipped underneath the advice. On Claude Opus 4.8, the guide says thinking stays off, and you have to explicitly turn on adaptive thinking. On Claude Opus 5, it runs with thinking on by default, and it can be disabled only at effort high or below. If you carried a prompt across that boundary, you carry a line that switches on something that is already on. Change 3, and this one costs money. The Opus 4.8 guide says, start with the extra high effort level for coding and agentic use cases, and use a minimum of high effort for most intelligence-sensitive use cases. The Opus 5 guide says, start with the default, high, and adjust based on your evals. Use low and medium liberally as your primary control for token cost and response time wherever quality holds, and step up to extra high for demanding coding and agentic work. So read that carefully. For coding and agentic work, both guides still land on extra high. What moved is the default. 4.8 said begin at extra high, Opus 5 says begin at high and step up only when the work demands it. There is a structural tell. Count the tuning sections in each guide. 11 in Opus 4.8, and 7 in Opus 5. That page carries 8 headings, minus 1 that is capability notes rather than tuning advice. Only 3 survive in both. Of the 4 new sections, 3 exist to damp the model down. Now the honest part. All 8 of the dropped sections still appear on the Claude Sonnet 5 page. The Opus guide narrowed to damping. Anthropic did not delete the advice. Rule 1. Delete the compensations. Stamp this one volatile. It is true for this generation of models, and it will expire. The specific test is this. If the guide for your model says the model already does something on its own, and your prompt tells it to do that thing, your prompt is now paying for behavior you were getting for free, and sometimes making it worse. Here is what that looks like in a real system prompt. 3 lines go. Always verify your work before responding. The model already verifies. Double-check your answer. The guide says, recheck instructions compound with behavior the model already has, and add cost without improving results. And after every 3 tool calls, summarize progress. That is exactly the scaffolding the Opus 4.8 and Sonnet 5 guides both tell you to try removing. The kill list, taken from the guides themselves. Explicit verification steps, remove them. Double-check and re-verify. The model self-corrects already, and rechecks just compound. Forced progress summaries every few tool calls. Try removing that scaffolding. A rule telling the model not to reason increases internal tag leakage rather than reducing it. And setting temperature to anything other than the default returns a 400 error on Claude Sonnet 5. Rule 2, also volatile. When something costs too much, the reflex is to drop to a smaller model. The guides never make that comparison, but they are emphatic about the other dial. On Claude Fable 5, the guide calls effort the primary control for the trade-off between intelligence, latency, and cost. On Claude Opus 5, it says use low and medium liberally as your primary control for token cost and response time wherever quality holds. My read of that is to turn effort down before you turn the model down. The Sonnet 5 guide offers a rough cross-model mapping. Sonnet 5 at medium is comparable in intelligence to Sonnet 4.6 at high. Sonnet 5 at high is comparable to 4.6 at max. Treat that as rough, because the guide does. It says, when benchmarking, match by observed thinking length rather than effort name. A notch down on the new model is often comparable to a notch up on the old one for fewer tokens. Here's the trap inside Rule 2. Do not disable thinking to save money. The Opus 5 guide says that with thinking disabled, the model occasionally writes a tool call into its user-facing text instead of a structured tool use block. The turn completes normally, the call never runs, and in agentic loops the leaked text stays in the conversation history. Their advice? Keep thinking on, lower the effort instead. Rule 3, and the stamp changes. Durable. Write boundaries, not behaviors. A behavioral instruction says, do not do that specific annoying thing. A boundary says, here is the shape of the job, and here is its edge. The Fable 5 guide puts it directly. Define explicit constraints on what Claude Fable 5 should and should not do. Now, that section exists because of a model behavior. The guide says Fable 5 can occasionally take unrequested actions, but the content of the constraint you write is a fact about your task, and that is what outlives the model. Compare 2 ways of writing the same intent. On the left, a pile of prohibitions. Do not refactor code I did not mention. Do not add error handling I did not ask for. Do not create helper functions. Every one of those is a patch on a behavior. On the right, 2 lines from the Opus 5 guide. Deliver what was asked at the scope intended. Finish the whole task and stop short of actions that are clearly beyond what was asked. Why does the boundary survive a model upgrade? Because it is not about the model at all. Scope is a fact about your work. This task ends here. No release note can make that stale. The list of prohibitions, by contrast, is a snapshot of one model's habits in one particular week. And the Opus 4.8 and Sonnet 5 guides both say those models follow instructions more literally than before. Rule 4, also durable. Never put the quality bar inside the finding step. If you tell a review pass to only report high-severity issues, a model that follows instructions literally may investigate just as deeply, and then report less. The guide's own recommended language instead. Do not filter for importance or confidence at this stage. A separate verification step will do that. Your goal here is coverage. Structurally, this is one stage doing two jobs. Finding and filtering fused into a single pass means a real bug can be found and then silently dropped, and you never see it. So split them. Stage 1, report everything, with a confidence and a severity attached. Stage 2, rank and filter. The guide adds that you can use that language even when there is no actual second step. And here is how you know Rule 4 is durable rather than volatile. That advice is not written once. It appears in the Opus 4.8 guide and in the Claude Sonnet 5 guide, and I ran a diff across both sections. The recommended prompt is byte-identical between them, character for character, and so is every line around it, apart from the model's name and one extra opening sentence. Different model family, different generation, the same recommended prompt. When Anthropic repeats advice across generations, they are telling you it is not a property of one model. Rule 5. Durable. Show the style you want. Do not forbid the one you do not. 3 of these 4 guides say it almost word for word. The Opus 5 version. Positive examples of the communication style you want tend to be more effective than instructions about what not to do, and the design sections go further. A generic prohibition tends to move the default somewhere else rather than produce variety. Here is how concrete that gets. The Opus 4.8 guide documents its own model's default house style down to a hex code, warm cream backgrounds, serif display type, italic word accents, a terracotta accent. Saying do not use cream tends to move the default rather than break it. What works per that guide? Specify a concrete alternative or ask for 4 visual directions before it builds. With temperature gone on Sonnet 5, that is the lever you have left. So here's the test, and it fits on one line. Read any instruction in your prompt and ask, am I patching the model or defining the job? If the line exists because the model does something you do not want, it is a patch, and it has an expiry date tied to the next release. If it exists because your task genuinely has that shape, it does not. That gives you a ritual for upgrade day, and it is 2 things. Reread your system prompt looking specifically for compensations, lines you wrote because an older model misbehaved, and rerun an effort sweep instead of carrying your old defaults forward. The Opus 5 guide says that outright. If you carried effort defaults over from a prior model, rerun an effort sweep on your own evals. 3 honest caveats. This is Anthropic's guidance about Anthropic's models, and the guides themselves tell you to rerun your own evals rather than trust the defaults. I could not find a prompting guide for Claude Sonnet 4.6. As of early August 2026, every comparison to that model here comes from the Sonnet 5 guide's own inline notes. And this before and after is one documented pair on the Opus line, not a law. By its own logic, the volatile half of this video expires. And the guardrail, where this does not apply. If you have a tuned production pipeline that works, do not strip it on release day because a guide changed. Measure first. And be careful about which model you trust to be literal. The Opus 4.8 and Sonnet 5 guides say those models do not silently generalize an instruction from one item to another, and do not infer requests you did not make. But the Opus 5 guide says close to the opposite about scope. Opus 5 can expand the scope of a task, adding steps that were not requested. So the scope boundary is one line you keep. 3 takeaways. 1. On every model upgrade, audit your prompt for expired compensations, the lines you wrote for a model that no longer needs them. 2. The guides call effort the primary cost control. My read of that is to turn effort down before you turn the model down. 3. If a line patches the model instead of defining the job, it has an expiry date, so write it knowing that. If this was useful, subscribe.